Uh, Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending on wherever you are. Would like to welcome you to the session 4 of the third Global Conference on the One Planet Network's Sustainable Food System Program, which actually today is the third day of the conference. My name is Thanawat Singh, the chairperson of the Committee on World Food Securities and also the permanent representative of Thailand to the United Nations agencies in Rome for FAO, WFP, and EFAT. For these sessions, we will discuss toward a holistic assessment for food systems policies, which this topic is particular relevance to the 2021 Food System Summit.
Hello, thank you very much. I think that the chair has frozen, so I'm going to just jump in. This is Alison Loconto. I am a Deputy Director at the Interdisciplinary Laboratory for Science, Innovation and Policy at the French National Institute for Research on Agriculture, Food and Environment. And so what I'm going to do today is to talk about an excellent session that we had yesterday. That was focused on two very rich discussions about the science policy interface for sustainable food systems. I'm going to begin sharing my screen. And as I do that, I want to tell you that the first session that we talked about was based on the type of data that is currently available for assessing sustainability of food systems, and then 3 new indices that offer policymakers tools for evidence-based policymaking. The first one was the Economist Intelligence Unit's Food Sustainability Index, the World Benchmarking Alliance's Food and Agricultural Benchmark, and then finally the Food Systems Dashboard that's been led by Johns Hopkins University in Gain. So in the second part of the session, we explored real-life trade-offs that stakeholders had to make when they were designing sustainable food systems interventions. In the very short term, very short time I have to be here with you this morning, I want to run quickly through what we mean by trade-offs in the context of sustainability. So first, we had Natalie Pinto from Ricolto, who presented the Maslago project, which was about a sustainable landscape management approach to save the lake that feeds one of Nicaragua's biggest cities. So their focus was on integrated landscape management, and they wanted to create opportunities for farmers, and particularly women farmers, to engage in more sustainable vegetable production and long-term sustainability within the lake's watershed, and to reduce also deforestation. So in order to turn a situation that had very strong negative short-term impacts in terms of the people and prosperity in the region that was affected, they had the initiative worked on social cohesion, pesticide container collection, sustainable agricultural practices, particularly on reducing erosion, and improved market linkages to raise income to better balance these short-term trade-offs with long-term sustainability. And indeed, through the project, they were able to deliver and turn these trade-offs into positive long-term outcomes. The second one that we talked about was the Zambian Food Change Lab. Then this was presented by William Chilufya from HIVOS. And here the high malnutrition and growing obesity in a policy environment that is strongly focused on promoting maize production was where they started from and what they were trying to work within. So in order to turn a situation that had short-term losses into one where there were long-term gains, they used a food indicator map to identify key issues that enabled participants to engage in the planning and policy process. So their main challenge was to increase diversity on the farm and in the plate, but they were able to do it through this participatory process and throughout the planning, implementation, and then the policy engagement. So finally, Freddie Harvey Williams from EFAD presented the Coastal Climate Resilient Infrastructure Project. And the main sustainability concern was related to the fact that their food system was located in a floodplain with a high incidence of poverty and undernutrition and highly affected by climate change. Their approach was to enhance the climate resilience of the coastal roads and markets in order to improve the livelihoods for the poor households, specifically women. Starting from a situation where economic and social benefits were very clear and certain in the short term, they were able to move forward as planned, and they didn't have to make changes throughout the project cycle as the other two examples actually did, in order to manage these trade-offs. And so, however, they were concerned about the environmental aspects that were not so apparent, and so they put in specific types of activities that would ensure that even the long-term environmental benefit would be felt in the long term. So these three experiences, they're available on the resources tab of the platform, and they offer some really important lessons for policymaking related to the science policy interface. But I just have time for one key message, and this is we can't afford to ignore the sustainability trade-offs in policymaking. Understanding who's winning and who's losing in the short, medium, and long terms is fundamental for informing policy decisions that prioritize sustainability and can achieve the greatest public good. For this, we need data, tools, and productive dialogue between the scientists, the practitioners, and the policymakers. And so there are always going to be trade-offs in policy decisions, but they can be managed in a way that enables us to continue making progress towards sustainable food systems, more sustainable food systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alison. Now we will move to the second presenters, Ms. Marianne Jensen. She is the director of the Trade and Agriculture Directorate at OECD in Paris. Marianne will present us an overview of the OECD work on food system with a focus on the roles of facts, interests, and also the values in coherence policy making. Now I give the floor to Marianne, please.
Thank you very much, Tanawat. Very pleased to be with you today, and I think my presentation will be very complementary to what you already heard from Alison before. At the OECD, when we talk about food systems, we are looking at three major challenges together. The challenge of meeting food security, nutrition requirements, the challenge of providing livelihoods, and the challenge of doing this in an environmentally sustainable way. And the challenges in these three areas are huge. Currently, we are in a situation where in the world, around 2 billion of people do not have regular access to safe and nutritious food in sufficient quantities, whereas the same amount of people are overweight or even obese. We are seeing a lot of structural change, technological change, COVID-19, that is putting pressure on the incomes of the people living from the 570 million farms around the world. And the third item, sustainability, it has been estimated that agricultural activity is responsible for between 20 to 40% of the man-made global greenhouse gas emissions, and maybe up to 80% of threatened land animals are threatened because of agricultural activity. So we have three big challenges at the global level, and we hope somehow with our new policies for sustainable food systems to address these three challenges at the same time. Now, Alison made already an important point. With many of the policies you introduce, you will have to address trade-offs, or maybe ideally, if you can, try to find policies that create synergies. For instance, if you introduce a fertilizer subsidies, that's something that helps farmers, but is not good for the environment. If instead you pay farmers to do environmental services to help strengthen the environment, you can deliver both income and do something for the environment, so you have a synergy. Nevertheless, it is very difficult to meet with one instrument 2 or 3 objectives. At OECD, we're going to launch a major publication on food systems in January next year. And one of the points we make there that is that you will probably have to think of at least 3 policy instruments if you want to meet the 3 objectives that we have that I've just listed. So as many policy instruments as objectives, that's an old lesson that is still valid for food systems today. We say more in this report. We say that knowing facts, data, as Alison mentioned, is important, but it will not be enough to design the right mix of policy instruments to meet these 3 challenges I just mentioned. In order to design that policy mix that has to be tailored to every specific situation, region, country, in order to find that policy mix, you have to also overcome differences in interest and differences in values. Alison already made reference to these differences, disagreements in interests. Most policies that are introduced will create both winners and losers. So you'll have to find a way to balance these interests, and often you can, with monetary flows, with monetary financial assistance, pay off the losers and make sure that some of what the winners get goes to the losers. So you can balance out the interests. Disagreements on values can be more difficult to overcome. And in the food systems world, we see a lot of disagreements on values. GMOs, for instance, are for some of us a magic bullet, a fantastic technology to help us overcome the problems of meeting nutrition requirements. For others, it's a dangerous technology that is just a quick fix and leads the world into the bad direction. Overcoming these differences of values is important to be able to design the right policies and get agreement on them. So we argued at the OECD that in order to find the right policies for food systems, you have to overcome differences, opinions on facts, disagreements on interests, and disagreements on values. And you need to have processes in place to do this. We have a lot of experience at the OECD to help governments with this, to help policymakers with this. And in the report we will publish in January, you will find more information on this. And in order to understand what you can do at the regional, national level, wherever you are, in order to get the facts together, to design evidence-based policies and to implement them by overcoming disagreements in interests and in values. All of this we think is necessary in order to overcome the triple challenge of meeting nutrition requirements, livelihood requirements, and doing this in an environmentally sustainable way.
Marian, for your thank you very much for your presentation, which actually we know that during the policy formulation or policy coherence and conversion process, there are several peoples and also groups that their voice are not heard. Especially when I work at the Committee on World Food Security, CFS, as a chairperson of this international intergovernmental platform. We know that there are many people, vulnerable people, marginalized people and groups, their voice never put on the table. And that's why I would like to ask Marian, how we can manage this situation. And also we know that all the policies have winners and losers. How we can have a right balance to address to these issues. I will start from Marian first and then Alison.
There are different ways to do this, and in our advice on how to set up governance processes, it is one of the challenges we try to address. I would like to mention one example of doing this that we have found to be very successful, which is the one of consult groups of randomly selected citizens. By randomly selecting, you increase the chances that you have a coverage of all the different interest groups and that you do not have the larger or richer interest groups, in particular the wealthier, more powerful ones, more represented. So that's one way of proceeding. It has been tested and has delivered good results.
Yeah, thank you, Marion. I will also ask the same question to Allison's. In your project or in your experience, how you deal with the situation of the voice that are not heard.
Yes, so thank you very much for this. And I really am intrigued by this, what Marion has just suggested about the random selection. I think this is a very interesting way to go about this. What we have mostly been thinking about and looking at is this idea that a lot of activities happen at the local level. Even global discussions are in a local level of that global sphere. And so we always have different interested groups who are engaged. And so it is important to make sure that there are the resources available to facilitate those who do not have their own resources to get there. And I think CFS has done this quite well, actually. And a number of other instances do facilitate that, but it's not just about being at the table. It's the ability to participate and bring the actual ideas and be listened to. And so civil society has been doing a lot in their own dynamics to organize and bring collective voices. And we see this a lot with the question of data. And so a lot of civil society organizations, the private sector as well, but they have also been engaging in this question of assessing, evaluating sustainability, and they are able to bring their information to the table. And so when you engage at these different levels, you can have a more productive dialogue. So in the case studies that we discussed, a lot of these processes have been brought about and facilitated at a local level, at a city level, with a city government involved, and the interested actors from private and sector and civil society, and they're trying to resolve, real situations. And so there are indeed an important element in facilitating that through, let's say, the local government perspective at that around that topic that they are all interested in finding a solution for.
Yeah,
it's not easy, but it does happen.
Right, it's not easy to. We know that when we work in through the multi-stakeholder approach, to get all people to sit together to participate in the policy formulation is a tough job. But we need to continue our effort. And thank you very much for your thoughts and also your ideas to share with us today, which actually Alison will leave us and Marion will continue with the next sessions with the panel discussion. For today, thank you very much. Thank you very much for both of you for your kind input and presentation. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to welcome you to the second part of today's session. We would like to welcome our excellent panelists, which actually today we have 5 panelists who will join us today. I would like to introduce some 5 of them. The first panelist is Jamie Morrison, who is the Director of Food System and Food Security Division at FAO, Foods and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Rome. The second panelist, both Vega Sohal. He is the Director General at the Norwegian Agencies for Development Cooperation, NORAD. Welcome you both. The next speaker is Mark Redka. He is the Deputy Director of the Economy Division at the UN Environment UNEP. Welcome, Mark, to join us today. And we also have other colleagues, our speakers from Asia. His name is Erwin Dixon. He is the counselor at Cebu cities from the Philippines. He will share with us the local experience, how to deal with people in the community. And also the last speaker who just presented us previously, Ms. Marion Jensen, who is the Director of Trade and Agriculture Directorate of Oecd. We will start with a very, very simple question for 5 of you. What is your one key ingredient for more coherent, holistic food system policy? We give you just only 45 seconds each to make sure that you will give us a key message. I will start with Jimmy, please.
Thank you, Tanawat, and hello to everybody. I think what's really holding back the transformation to more sustainable food systems is the lack of alignment of the many, many initiatives and innovations that are already being taken by food system stakeholders to improve their food systems. And fostering this alignment, and that's my missing ingredient, requires a coherent set of policy interventions that incentivize changes in the behavior, not just of one set of actors towards a single objective, but of all stakeholders towards an agreed and balanced set of outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Very precise. Next, I would like to, I give the floor to Board, please.
Thank you. That's not a simple question. It's the hardest question, but I'd go for a commitment anchored at the highest political level, simply because food systems are so much integrated into different sectors in society, right? Health, agriculture, climate, business sectors, and so on. And without, and these often coexist, you know, alongside each other in different ministries and conferences and discussions. And without a very strong political leadership and an anchoring maybe at a very high level, the kind of coherence that Jamie is also talking about is impossible.
Thank you, Board. Mark, what do you think about this? Yeah, the key ingredients.
So my thoughts come out of something called the Collaborative Framework for Food Systems Transformation, which has been looking at these issues. I think we need approaches that are absolutely more broad and more participatory. This is in a sense reframing or restating what some of the earlier speakers said, but we need a greater number of minds at the table. Approaches that bring in diverse groups. I like Marianne's lottery system, for example. Approaches that cut across boundaries so that we're looking at both the production and the consumption side of the food system, and that are much more multi-level, meaning involving national level governments down to local governments and local people. So in doing this not only at the policy formation side, but also in implementation and the monitoring and feedback that make for better policies. Thanks.
Yep, thank you very much. Alvin, what do you think?
Thank you, Tanawat, and thank you to the organizers for having me here. Cebu City has introduced and passed several food system policy measures, both prior and during the pandemic. These include our policies on food waste management through food donation and recycling, institutionalization of urban food gardening in all the villages in our city, and the establishment of a government-run and managed food bank to address hunger and food insecurity, especially in times of disaster and public health emergencies. In our experience in policy formulation, we can cite that one key ingredient for more coherent, holistic food system policies is foremost the acknowledgement of the social ills that we intend to address. In other words, the problems are not hypothetical, but have been there as far as we can remember, and they are evolving, and thus entails concrete policy response at the local level. Like our policy measure on food waste management, our premise begins with a solid data on billion tons of food being wasted, vis-a-vis the increasing number of people who are experiencing severe hunger and food insecurity. We also approach the problem of food waste multidimensionally, as it is not only an issue of the people's right to adequate food, but also how food waste impacts the environment, since producing food that will not be consumed leads to unnecessary carbon dioxide emissions, causing global heating or warming. In other words, we endeavor that our policy formulation is evidence-based, as it attempts to address a real problem that our constituents have direct experience.
Thank you, Erwin, for your intervention, very concrete. Now I give the floor to Marianne, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to make 3 points. First, acknowledge that it's complex, but don't get lost in complexity. Second, I've forgotten my second point. How can it be? No, here it is important. Second, use as rule of thumb that you need as many policies as you have objectives. And third, if you design this policy mix, make sure that they are based on facts, that you balance out diverging interests, and that you find agreement on different values in the group that you are trying to help.
Yeah, thank you very much. Which actually I have heard many issues that you mentioned about the political views, political commitment, collaborative framework, and also how to work through the diverse group and multi-level, which actually we know that is not easy. And also, as some of you already mentioned, about the complexity of the overall system, and also to make sure that all the process based on facts and evidence, and also to make sure that we have the overall agreement among all stakeholders. Now we move to the next question, which actually we know that during the policy formulation, we were gone through the experience of the conflicting goals and also trade-off of the policies, and that's why how you can manage to address these conflicting goals and also trade-off in the policy making process, which actually we know that is not easy, and that's why I would like to ask Mark, what would you recommend to the governments that want to start implementing a holistic approach to their food policies, but do not know where and how to start? Mark, please.
Well, I think you're always on good grounds beginning with the science. Good science that supports understanding about the trade-offs, about the complexities of the various bits and how they're connected. And you without a good understanding of the science that lies behind any of these issues, I'd really think that good policy and good implementable policy is going to be very difficult. So applying tools like life cycle thinking, materials flow analysis, and getting an assessment of a good scientific assessment of the externalities that are associated with the food system, like impacts on biodiversity or ecosystems. The goal here, I think, driven by good science, would be to make sure that there are no unknown trade-offs between the three goals of the impacts on health, environment, and profitability of the system. And when you can't get when there are trade-offs to be made, I think at least these need to be negotiated and understood and accepted by those broad constituencies that we were talking about. So the approach, that brings in, that favorite term we all use, multi-stakeholders, but make sure that there are, and I think it was Allison who said, to the extent possible, that there aren't losers in the transitions. Someone who I respect greatly once said that when you look at win-win solutions, sometimes it's win-win, lose, 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 and it's the failure to bring in those losers, who will suffer disproportionately by change, who block transformation of a system. So participatory governance, and I think someone mentioned this already, perhaps, but too often we set off on these big issues, these big transformational, journeys without really having a good idea of what kind of indicators and what kind of monitoring mechanisms are necessary to gauge progress and give us the kind of adaptive management, the mid-course corrections and the dialogue that's necessary to make changes. So science, multi-stakeholder approaches, and a good sense of where you want to go and what you might need to change along the way to get there.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Now I move to Boat. I know that you're working at the Norwegian Agencies for Development Cooperation, which actually we know that when you are working on the policy formulations with several stakeholders, as you mentioned earlier, how to address the trade-offs and also conflict of interest in the policy formulation. Do you think how you manage to cope with these issues?
Now, of course, that's a really challenging task because food systems are full of these conflicting interests or trade-offs, really. And currently, the Norwegian government has an action plan for sustainable food systems in which we've tried to address some of these trade-offs. And if I've got time, let me give you two examples. The first is, of course, that in some cases there could be a trade-off between climate emissions and producing more food or even nutritious food, and that is maybe particular for a country where malnutrition is a huge problem, and where the burden of undernourishment is large. If it's going to produce more or have more healthy food, that could also lead to consumption-related emissions rising. Another trade-off, which is obvious, of course, is a classic market trade-off between ensured increased income for small-scale farmers that produce most of the food globally, and the affordability of healthy food in the market, which is probably the biggest and most common trade-off. So we've looked at least I wouldn't call it solutions, but I mean some of the patterns of solution that we need. And one that is obvious is of course increasing productivity and with sustainable practices. I should add. That is, it's very hard to see solving some of these trade-offs without going in that direction. So that has been at the core of the whole action plan for us, how we can support that direction in different ways. Then, of course, in countries like Norway and other northern countries with importing a lot of food, diets is also, of course, at the heart of what we need to look at. Here, I think that the science is very clear. We know a lot. It's actually going from science to changing the practices, to bringing stakeholders to the table, to finding solutions together, which is the hard part. So those are at least some of the trade-offs that we are trying to work with. And I would say that this is an issue where we have quite a lot of science, but we haven't been able to go from science to practical policies in many cases.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your inputs, which actually some of the issues is very interesting that we will discuss more during the next sections. Now, I would like to talk with Jamie. We know that you are one of the leaders of the Food System Summit 2021 work stream on evidence, knowledge, and policies, and how these issues of the policy coherence is going to be addressed at the Food System Summit, and how relevant policy coherence is for food system transformation in your point of view. Jamie, please.
Okay, no, thank you. I think, before touching in particular on the Food System Summit process, I think it's important to introduce another issue, which is the fact that transformation towards food system development needs to be understood as a dynamic process. Yes, we need to strike these balances between economic, environmental, health, social objectives, but we also need to recognize that the objectives will differ across societies and will change over time. And I think Mark very nicely articulated the need to have in place systems which can adapt to these changes. And certainly that's a focus moving forward as we move forward through the summit towards the the post-summit implementation of the solutions that we're developing during the process towards the summit. There need to be systems put in place which allow adaptation, because we won't get it right just by developing solutions and putting those in place. We will need to reflect change over time. But I think an important aspect that we're really focusing in on is the fact that too often the inclusiveness dimension of food system outcomes is neglected. We certainly need improved access to healthy diets produced in a more environmentally sustainable way, but we need to do that in a way which better understands the implications of those changes for the 500 million plus smallholders who produce the significant proportion of food, for the many small and medium-sized enterprises that collect, transform, distribute, and the small-scale retailers, which ultimately provide the key point of purchase for urban consumers. No matter how good the pathways we come up with, how good the science, and how good the design of coherent packages of incentives that we can put in place, nothing will move unless these pathways recognize the willingness, but also the capacity of these smallholder actors to change their behavior and what they're doing. So I think two key elements that we're focusing in on as part of the process. Firstly, the evidence-based decision-making. Data is critical, and there are a number of new initiatives, such as the Food Systems Dashboard, FAO's new geospatial platform, which provide greater access and transparency of data. But at the same time, we also need to capacitate actors to understand and to use the growing number of methodologies, tools, analytical frameworks, which can help them to diagnose, analyze, and evaluate the performance of their food systems. And a second component, I think, again, relates back to the governance systems that need to be put in place to help stakeholders adapt as they move forward. There are many multi-stakeholder platforms which will be integrated into and supported through the process towards the Food Systems Summit. At FAO, for example, we put a lot of focus on supporting the establishment of food policy councils in cities. And these perform a function of bringing in many different constituencies at that locality to ensure that food is available in an accessible, affordable way to poor urban consumers. At a larger scale, we're working with partners such as CHIAM and Union for the Mediterranean, and this is actually an affiliated project of the Sustainable Food Systems Programme to develop a Mediterranean Sustainable Food Systems platform, which again will enable stakeholders to articulate the best way forward and provide a system for that adjustment along the way. And as a bit of pre-advertising, that will form the basis of a side event which will be held as part of this conference next Thursday. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you mentioned, the transformations is the dynamic process, and we also need everyone to participate in this process to make sure that we get all the joint effort from all sectors to transform our food system. And also, I think one of the issues that you mentioned about post-summit, I think is very, very interesting, because we have heard several times that this summit is a summit of solution, and that's why we have to be ready to implement what we are thinking that we need to do. Now, I would like to move to Irvin. He is from Philippines. He is from the city, the Cebu city. And actually, previously, he already mentioned about food waste, how the Cebu city manage the food waste in the local area. And that's why I would like to know, or perhaps you can tell us a bit about how the city of Cebu is using the policy coherence to address the issue of food waste from your own experience. Irwin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanat. And to address your question, careful consideration of trade-offs is important in policy making processes. At the local level, this is quite challenging since a wide spectrum of interests are involved and local governance is oftentimes relational. And as what Marion said earlier, that we really need to creatively manage this diversity of interests, which are sometimes conflicting on food waste management and other food system related policy measures. When we developed our ordinance on food waste management, we provided a platform for stakeholders to discuss our proposed policy in order for them to understand the context of the proposed measure. We always ask these questions. What are the desired social benefits? What key rules they would play? And how crucial is their compliance? What immediate benefits they can derive if they comply our proposed measure, among others. Essentially, before we submit the policy to the City Council for approval, we have already provided a venue for stakeholders to understand the trade-offs and social benefits and solicit their input in order to strengthen and enhance our proposed policy measure. But that it is also our experience that we cannot reconcile all these conflicting interests after hearing all sides, but laws are needed to benefit the many of our constituents, and this is what we call the concept of general welfare.
Yeah, thank you, Alvin, for bring us through your experience in Philippines and also how to keep balanced about the social benefit for all, especially at the local area. Now I would like to ask Marion. Actually, you just presented your presentation about this OECD work, and you also mentioned about the new products or publications of the OECD on food system, which actually from the Committee on World Food Security, CFS. Perhaps you may know that now we are working on the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition, which actually I think is OECD also participated in this process. Which I would like to ask you more details how the your new publication on food system will support the policies coherence on these particular issues, please.
Thank you, Tamawat. I will, in order to explain this, go back to this flow we have from facts, so science, interests, and values. Now, on the fact side, we do a lot increasingly work where we look at multiple objectives together. So we are building models that look at both, not both, triple the economic impact on livelihoods, the impact on nutrition, and the impact on the environment. We also partly build on these models, we start to build indicators that look at these multiple objectives together. And I'm looking here at Bart on my screen. He doesn't see that, but he mentioned this. The need to have, for instance, productivity indicators that look also at the environment. So we are very much, that's a core of our work, is helping on the fact side. Now, in the policy process, how do you get from the facts to interests and values? Here, I think scientists have an important role to play in their communication efforts. Because one thing is to generate the facts. The other thing is to bring these facts into a policy-making process where stakeholders probably do not have a deep understanding of the models and the assumptions behind. And what to do when scientists don't agree. And this happens. So how to bring over these disagreements and the findings into the stakeholder discussions. In particular, information, facts on trade-offs should flow into the debates where disagreements and interests are meant to be overcome. And I think it's in these discussions where the randomly selected groups can be particularly useful. So you do not want certain interests to be overrepresented. So bring the facts in a well-communicated way into the stakeholder discussions around interests. When it comes to values, their facts maybe play a different role, and the policymaker plays a different role. I believe that their communication from the policymaker side will be very important, because ultimately compromises among different values will have to be found. And that's not something you can fix with money, and not necessarily with number. You have to get shared opinions around shared values in the society you are representing. So these are some further hints into how to make the facts, interest, values work in reality, in practice.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing, let's say, as you mentioned about the role of facts, interest, and also the values in addressing trade-off, or let's say through the policy coherence process, which actually is very important. And also science is one of the key issues that we have to bring science on board. We have some question from audience as well. May I start from Mark, which actually our audience asked the questions you have said about collaborative framework. How would, because, and also we talk a lot about youth, the role of youth, and the question is, how would youth voice be heard in the future food system policies?
Well, I haven't given a lot of thought to this, but my experience in other areas that it begins with inviting someone to the table who can speak with some kind of authority on or represent the interests of youth. I imagine they're fairly diverse. I don't know if Marianne's idea of kind of a random selection would work there, but the idea would be, I think you begin by saying it's absolutely relevant to have youth, at the table, so to speak, and then look for, the appropriate organizations or entry points. But I would agree wholeheartedly with the premise that they should be part of the discussion. They, I don't know, we were all young once, so it's a little bit weird to refer to youth as you, but I think I'd absolutely agree with your premise.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And also, Bart, you mentioned about the role of, because I think we know that our small-scale farmers produce 70 or 80% of the food that we consuming. But several times we know that our small-scale farmers, when we're talking about the policies, discussion or formulations, they are not there and they are not included. And how we can manage to bring them on board to discuss on the policies, formulations, or the policy coherence at the local level or at the national level, since I know that your government are ready to have the national dialogue for food system summit very soon. You have to unmute, yeah, please.
Yeah, no, that's a really key question. On several of the others have in a way, touched upon it. As a donor, NORAD's role is not. We are not creating the dialogues in the system themselves. We are a donor. We're trying to help others doing good processes. And when we look for partners in our work, for instance, the food sustainability work or the Norwegian Climate and Forest Initiatives, we work with forests and land use in 3 continents. We try to not only ask them, but we actually also demand that processes are set up that include the most important groups that have interests in an area or in a process. We have implemented schemes saying that indigenous groups, that local communities, that small-scale farmers,
Yep.
of course, I mean, in many places, almost all are small-scale farmers with interest there, that they should be included in the processes and also within the program setups. So we are very much working with that issue. But at the same time, it is also necessary that in the broader political process in each country or in each region, that there are mechanisms for groups to be part of the process. And I think also working to strengthen civil society, to strengthen the right to organize, the ability to actually organize, is part of the broader agenda that is needed to do good work with sustainable food systems. But this is really, it's key, but it's also very challenging.
Yeah, thank you. We know that it's very challenging to bring them on board, and we have to make sure that their voice are heard by us and also by the policy makers. Jamie, we know that you work at FAO, and FAO working a lot on food system, on transformation of sustainable food system at the country level to support the countries. However, we know that we cannot do everything at the same time. We need to prioritize, and also at the country level as well, that we need to prioritize our activities, our programs as well. And the policy should work toward the realizations of the right to food and other human rights. And that's why I would like to hear your views how we can start our work with the prioritized group or with vulnerable groups or marginalized group, which actually are how FAO work with the member countries to support those groups. Jamie.
Thank you, Tanawa. And I agree that the right to food is fundamental in all of the discussions that we're having. We all know the numbers coming out of the most recent SOFI report issued by FAO in collaboration with a number of partners. 3 billion people globally do not have the ability to afford a healthy diet. And there's something fundamentally wrong if we can't achieve an improved situation on that. Over 1 billion people can't even afford a nutrient-sufficient diet, let alone a healthy diet. So this will have to remain a primary focus of our work moving forward in the transformation of food systems. We need to acknowledge the multiple objectives that we're trying to achieve through the transformation towards more sustainable food systems, but the fundamental right to food needs to be among them. And vulnerable groups, we often think immediately of vulnerable groups of producers, smallholder producers, but we need to look across the spectrum. Poor urban consumers are particularly vulnerable, and we've seen that during the COVID pandemic. At FAO, we did a survey in April, May, of the impacts within municipalities around the world on of the sort of policies and approaches that municipalities have been putting in place. And what we found, not only were the impacts pretty severe, but the ability of municipalities to respond quickly and flexibly was quite astonishing, given that they didn't have additional resources. So I think that highlights how municipalities, other subnational processes can really play a role in pushing this agenda forward and bringing sort of food to the top of the agenda, and particularly the right to food to the top of the agenda.
Thank you, Jimmy, which actually it linked to the next question that I will give to our colleague from Philippines about the role of municipalities. We know that at the country level, at the local level, there are many people have left behind, or there are some vulnerable and marginalized people in the rural areas are left behind. And that's why I would like to hear from Erwin how your local government support or work to support those vulnerable and also marginalized people and groups to make sure that they get access to food.
Well, in the context of in our own context, in our own context in local governance, specifically in local legislation, a very important ingredient in our policy making is what we refer to as collaborative local legislation. This means that we need to be consultative, we need to be participative on and inclusive in our policy making processes. And this is also one way of engaging our marginalized and sectors and vulnerable groups in our society. It is important that we recognize the expertise and the raw wisdom of our marginalized sectors in order to arrive at a sound, coherent, responsive, and relevant policy measure. Gardening as a way to help our marginalized sectors, we will be mobilizing 600 urban poor associations in the different parts of the city to start their urban food gardens to address food security, especially in this time of the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Erwin. I think now we really get a lot of ideas and views from all of you how we can move forward. And now I would like to give the floor to Alvin Kopse from Federal Office of Agriculture. Wrap up these sessions. I hope that Erwin is here already. Where is our colleagues? Yeah, now the floor is yours, Alvin, to wrap up this session.
Hello, Tanawat. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all my colleagues who spoke before me. It was really indeed a very interesting session with a lot of. The discussion was really very rich, and many issues have been addressed, and so it's kind of a challenging to wrap this up. My notes are a little bit over the place, but let's try to do that. Certainly a few themes came across in several, if not all, interventions, and I really try to paraphrase them here. So I think in order to be successful, a food systems transformation processes need highest level commitments, because these processes are complex. There are many trade-offs to be addressed, many choices to be made. And last but not least, these processes are dynamic and will also change over time. A food system transformation in support of the SDGs at national and local levels requires policies that promote sustainability along the entire value chain, taking into due account the social and environmental and economic dimensions. Such policies need to be designed with a holistic approach, linking areas such as agriculture, nutrition, the environment, health, trade, dietary consideration, and consumption together, just to name a few of those policy areas. Additionally, these food systems policies need to be designed in a way that they manage to successfully address conflicting goals and trade-offs between those areas mentioned. Conflicting goals and trade-offs can be best addressed by working through inclusive multi-stakeholder bodies that are representative of all relevant actors in the system. And one method mentioned during the discussion on how to put these bodies together is random selection. So a very interesting approach there. But certainly one not only needs to be selected, I would add here, but also to be heard. So the issue of voice is important. And of course, there are methodologies around how to ensure this. The multi-stakeholder bodies should be linked to the policymaking process. This sounds obvious, but it's not always very easy. Then the issue of trade-offs is crucial, and yesterday's session highlighted the role of science in informing policy decisions dealing with trade-offs. But today, I think we looked beyond facts at the underlying interests and values that determine our respective policy goals and our understanding on sustainable food systems. I think a good policy mix balances facts, interests, and values. Now, let me quickly share my screen, if that works. I hope it will work. I hope you can see my screen. So since its beginning, the SFS program of the One Planet Network has strived to promote a common understanding of sustainable food systems, to build a basis for the development of more coherent policies. And in this context, it's my pleasure to announce the official release of the latest publication, you see it on your screen, hopefully, of the program entitled Towards a Common Understanding of Sustainable Food Systems, Key Approaches, Concepts, and Terms. The publication is the result of a long and very broad multi-stakeholder consultative process. It is accessible under resources in the menu of the conference platform, and I really invite you to make use of it and share it widely. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Erwin, for your very nice wrap up. And also I would like to thank all speakers, panelists, and also especially for our audience for following us, our discussion today. And also I would like to, as in capacities of the chair of the Committee on World Food Securities, as I mentioned earlier, now we are working on in developing the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition, and we are expecting that this voluntary guideline will be approved by the CFS panelists next year. And we do hope that the voluntary guideline will help and support the members and also other stakeholders to transform your food system, and also we together we will build back better. Thank you very much. Thank you.